Well, this week saw President Cyril Ramaphosa's son Andile coming clean about receiving 2 million rand from the controversial company Bosasa. That's in a business deal he says he now regrets. In Parliament, the President is on record saying should his son be guilty of receiving money from Bosasa, he would personally bring him to account. Don't take my word for it. Here's what the President said himself.
I asked him at close range whether this was money that was obtained illegally, unlawfully, and he said this was a service that was provided, and to this end, he actually even showed me a contract that he signed with Bosasa, and the contract and the contract also deals with issues of integrity, issues of anti-corruption, and all that. I have made sure that I get the information as much as I can, and he is running a clear and honest business as an advisory service. And if it turns out, Mr. Maimane, I can assure you, if it turns out that there is any illegality and corruption in the way that he has dealt with this matter, I will be the first, absolutely first, to make sure that he becomes accountable. Even if it means, I can assure you, even if it means that I am the one who will take him to the police station.
And it's that comment that we're now going to unpack how the President is navigating the scandal. It's a huge pleasure to welcome to Newsnight public relations strategist Makosini Mgwitwa joining us. Makosini, good to have you with us. I see you half giggling while listening to that soundbite. For someone who is a public relations strategist, and I'm sure I'd even go as far as to say an expert on this, how bad is this evening? Is this a cringe moment for Cyril Ramaphosa?
You know, it's a cringe moment because we know now Bosasa is a company whose core business was corruption. Whatever it is that they were doing, it was just about them getting money, keeping some and giving some the other money to politicians. So it's very difficult to argue that there is any credible service that was provided by the President's son to Bosasa. The only inference we can draw, or the only conclusion we can come to, is that Bosasa was trying to get the influence of the now President, and whether or not they achieved that, we don't know at the moment.
If you were the President's public relations strategist and expert this evening, you've just heard me intro that particular soundbite. You're sitting perhaps at the Union Buildings, I'm not sure where the President is tonight, and you're watching it, and he turns to you and goes, Makosini, what do I do? Look,
I think, you know, what is the fact that we must look at is that, you know, corruption is the biggest problem that the ANC is facing. You know, when you talk about corruption, that's what really is the biggest bugbear of the ANC. I don't know if, you know, like I said earlier, that there is any favor that was accrued to Bosasa as a result of the work that, you know, allegedly his son conducted for them. But, you know, it just simply means that, you know, as he is facing elections now, this is not the issue that he wants to be seized with for the longest time. He would want it to be dealt with and to pass. But I think the point that I want to make to you is that President Ramaphosa has highest amounts of political capital than any president after democracy. Political capital simply means that people give him the benefit of the doubt, people trust him, people believe that he's doing the best for the country. So if you have had stories of corruption that, like we've had, and you know, with the testimony that there was money that was given to the top 6, and Deputy President Ramaphosa was part of that top 6. So I think there is fatigue in terms of corruption on the part of the voters, but also what enables that is that we have opposition parties which are mediocre in their approach. If you take, for instance, Zimbabwe as an example, and Namibia, Zimbabwe got its independence in 1980. Namibia got its independence in 1990. But around 2000 in Zimbabwe, there was really, a groundswell of opposition to ZANU-PF. That's because opposition parties in Zimbabwe came together. They put their differences aside. They took organs of civil society. Morgan Tsvangirai who was the leader of the MDC, had been a leader of the labor movement, just like Zolinzi Mavavi, maybe around 2003. So there was that coming together of opposition parties to say, here is an alternative to the ruling party. If you look across to Namibia, opposition parties are behaving exactly like they behave in South Africa. They're fighting their own battles, hoping that they can unseat SWAPO, and they've failed. So opposition parties in South Africa also are going to fail because of the reason they're not working together.
Okay, so that's the opposition part. Perhaps let me bring you back to my question, and perhaps, the President this evening, how is he handling this as the President himself, as the President of the ANC and the President of the ruling party? What does President Ramaphosa do about this? The opposition parties are always going to have their say. It's what they do. What does he do to try and fix this, if he can?
Look, I'll tell you what advice a public relations strategist would give it to him. It would be deflect, go back to the campaign message, because an issue like this diverts him from the campaign. The fact that we're talking about it is not what the ANC would like to happen. So if he talks about it, he gives it fuel, he keeps it live. So he would want to move away from it as much as possible and go back to the message of anti-corruption that he's been driving, that he does have credibility on, considering the appointments he's made and all the decisions that he's taken.
Does he really have the credibility on the anti-corruption? Because I think so many South Africans, and partly perhaps as a result of social media and 24-hour news channels, they're always going to pull the president back to, yes, you're saying anti-corruption, yet there's your son. Can he really get away with this? Why would the president, for example, why would you not say to him, you know what, own the message, own the problem, and own the solution?
Yes. Look, you see, this will now bring me back to the issue of the media as to whether our news media fires on all cylinders. I think a lot of the time the president is allowed to get away with these things. You'll find very senior journalists who have made it their business to defend him in the media, to use their media platforms to defend him. So, there was also talk that there could be a live debate between him and his opponents. He has refused to do that. I don't think the media has held him to account. I don't think the media has put him under pressure to do that. So I think, look at where the country is and where President Ramaphosa is trying to take us. Not many journalists, not many commentators would like to go hard on President Ramaphosa, because if it were to happen that he topples, who's the second person behind him? It's not other than David Mabuza, who arguably is the boogeyman of South African politics. I don't think that many people in the media would like to have a David Mabuza presidency quite yet. And also, if you look at how President Ramaphosa is managing the economy, whatever problems that we have, whatever things that happen, it could be load shedding or whatever, you're not seeing the rand being as volatile as it was before. That's because he has appointed people who are selling a very good message story to the world abroad. And also, ratings agencies have given him... so I'm saying, if you look at the totality of his management of the country and where he's taking it, there aren't many people who would want to see him toppled. And therefore, they become somewhat soft on him. But also because he has shown, even during the campaign for the ANC presidency, that he is running on anti-corruption.
So are you suggesting almost that South Africa on this, I'm not going to call it a small issue, the issue surrounding his son, is almost willing to look the other way because some would argue the damage that's been done in the last 9 years, and many commentators have referred to it as damage, the president is fixing that, so we're going to let this one slide. Is South Africa and South African media getting soft?
You know, yes, we are getting soft, definitely. There's no question about it. Just imagine if this had been Duduzane Zuma or Edward Zuma or Kolobuse Zuma. There would have been much more noise than it is now. So the media is allowing him a free pass on some issues, but also because I think there was a bit of sophistication in putting together, assuming that, let's worst case scenario, assume it was for corrupt purposes. There would have been a contract that is written, that the contract on its own is bulletproof. You can't do anything about it. It's just us knowing and the perceptions around Bosasa that it must have been for corrupt purposes. But on its own, you cannot say the president did this to favor Bosasa.
Is there a positive spin at all here, as a public relations strategist and expert? Is there a positive spin at all on what's happening with the president's son? Is there anything that he can turn this on as a positive? Why not, as we heard in the clip, take his son to the nearest police station? Is that not what many South Africans would expect from him? He said it.
Yes, which is precisely the point that I'm making, that the contract on its own, it would say that he was paid so much for work that he did. So on its own, you cannot point out to any criminality. It's at the perception level because of what Bosasa, the company, we know it now to be. And also that, one would have expected that if the president wants to be taken seriously, more seriously, on the issue of corruption, perhaps there could be talk of that money being returned. But if Andile Ramaphosa is going to say, I provided work, I put my time, blood, sweat and tears into what I was being paid for, then legally, in my view, you cannot argue that there was any criminality. It's just that we know that Bosasa is a corrupt company.
Do you think it's done any damage for brand ANC and brand Ramaphosa for the elections?
Look, there are two brands, the two brands that you talk about, we must separate them. I think the ANC, in terms of its brand equity, it has suffered a lot in the past 9 years. But brand Ramaphosa is stronger. In fact, even opinion polls do suggest that he's more popular than the ANC. Which means that more South Africans have more confidence in him than they have in the ANC. But it's also because he's got a sleek PR around him. Kusela Diko, his spokesperson, came here herself personally, unlike her predecessor during Jacob Zuma's time, who just used a telephone only and come nowhere near studio. But she was here to answer questions, and the president himself, whenever he is challenged, like he was challenged now, you don't get the arrogance that we had perceived to be around the presidency during Jacob Zuma's time. You find a person who's humble, saying, I have looked into this. If there's a problem, I'll do something about it. I think that, he can get away with this one if there isn't going to be another scandal involving his son, because then it will become too messy.
It's a huge pleasure having you in to come and speak to us. And maybe the president was watching this evening, Makosini. Thank you very much.
Thank you for
coming in to speak to us. Public relations strategist Makosini Mgwita joining us here on Newsnight.